The biting wind howled across the snow-laden plains of Wyoming Territory, carrying with it the promise of death for anyone foolish enough to brave its wrath. Lillian Palmer clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, knowing full well the thin fabric offered little protection against the December blizzard of 1876. Her mare had gone lame 3 miles back, forcing her to continue on foot toward what she hoped was the direction of El Dorado Canyon. Frigid tears formed icy tracks down her cheeks as she trudged forward. The storm had come so suddenly, transforming the clear autumn day into a white nightmare within hours. Her fingers had long since lost feeling, and each labored breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. Lillian knew she couldn't last much longer. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, the words immediately swallowed by the howling wind. The supply wagon she'd been traveling with had been attacked by bandits 2 days ago. She'd managed to escape on horseback, while the others, God rest their souls, hadn't been so fortunate. When her legs finally gave out, Lillian collapsed into a snowdrift. The cold embraced her like an old friend, and for a moment, the painful numbness receded into an almost pleasant warmth. She knew this was death's embrace had seen it take others in winters past. As her eyelids grew heavy, a strange peace settled over her. Perhaps this was better than the life she was leaving behind. Through the curtain of falling snow, a dark shape materialized. Lillian struggled to focus her fading vision, a horse, and rider. Surely her mind was playing cruel tricks in her final moments. The figure dismounted, strong arms lifting her from the snow. Through frost-laden eyelashes, she glimpsed a rugged face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, concern etched into features weathered by sun and wind. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was deep, tinged with urgency. Lillian tried to respond, but her lips refused to form words. The stranger cursed under his breath, then wrapped her in something warm, his coat, before lifting her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securing her against his chest. "My home has room for your healing," he said, his warm breath ghosting against her ear. "Just hold on." As consciousness slipped away, Lillian wondered if she'd already died, and this was merely a comforting illusion before the final darkness claimed her. Vincent Hawkins had been tracking a mountain lion that had taken one of his calves when the storm hit. He'd nearly turned back, but something instinct perhaps had urged him onward. Finding the woman half buried in snow seemed like providence, though whether good or ill remained to be seen. The ride back to his homestead was arduous. The woman in his arms was so cold she barely felt human, more like carrying carved ice. Vincent knew the danger well. He'd seen men lose fingers, toes, even their lives to the Wyoming winters. His cabin appeared through the whiteout, a single window glowing with lamplight where his ranch hand, Thomas, kept watch. Vincent whistled sharply as they approached, and Thomas emerged immediately, taking the reins as Vincent dismounted with the woman still cradled against him. "Sweet Jesus," Thomas muttered, catching sight of Lillian's blue-tinged face. "Is she?" "Not yet," Vincent replied grimly, shouldering past him into the cabin's warmth. "Stoke the fire and bring all the blankets we have." The cabin was modest but solid, a main room with a sturdy stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a lean-to that served as storage. Vincent had built it himself after returning from the war, determined to claim his own piece of the expanding West. 5 years of backbreaking work had transformed the raw land into a functioning cattle ranch, though prosperous might be a generous description. He laid the woman gently on the bearskin rug before the hearth, his practiced hands already working to remove her snow-crusted clothes. There was no place for modesty when frostbite threatened. Thomas bustled about, adding logs to the fire and gathering blankets. "Should I fetch Doc Evans?" Thomas asked, setting a kettle to boil. Vincent shook his head, not looking up from his task. "Storm's too fierce. We're on our own until morning at least." As he peeled away the layers of sodden fabric, Vincent was relieved to find no obvious signs of frostbite on her extremities. Her skin was deathly pale, but the tissue remained pliable. A good sign. Once he had her down to her undergarments, he wrapped her in warm blankets, rubbing her arms and legs to stimulate circulation. Thomas handed him a cup of whiskey. "Get this into her if you can." Vincent nodded, gently lifting the woman's head and bringing the cup to her colorless lips. "Come on now," he murmured. "Just a sip." Her eyelids fluttered, and she coughed as the liquor burned down her throat but swallowed nonetheless. Vincent felt a surge of hope she was fighting throughout the night. Vincent maintained his vigil. Thomas eventually retired to his small bedroom off the kitchen, but Vincent remained by the fire, periodically checking on his charge, rewrapping blankets, and ensuring the fire blazed hot. By dawn, color had returned to the woman's cheeks, and her breathing had grown steady and deep. The storm subsided with the rising sun, leaving a pristine white landscape in its wake. Vincent was dozing in his chair when a soft voice startled him awake. "Where am I?" He straightened, finding the woman watching him with wary green eyes. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "My ranch," Vincent replied, reaching for the water pitcher. "About 15 miles northwest of El Dorado Canyon. I found you in the snow yesterday." She accepted the water with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered after drinking deeply. "I was certain that you were done for." Vincent finished with a slight smile. "Nearly were. Lucky I was out tracking that mountain lion." The woman attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. Vincent moved to assist her, propping pillows behind her back. "Lillian Palmer," she offered once settled. "I was traveling with a supply wagon to El Dorado Canyon when we were attacked. Bandits. I was the only one who got away." Vincent's expression darkened. "Damn road agents, been getting bolder lately." He introduced himself with a tip of an invisible hat. "Vincent Hawkins." "This is my spread, modest as it is." Lillian glanced around the cabin, taking in the simple but well-maintained furnishings. "It feels safe," she said softly. "That's not something I've known much of lately." Before Vincent could respond, Thomas entered from outside, stamping snow from his boots. "Morning," he called cheerfully, his eyes lighting up at seeing Lillian awake. "Well now, look who's rejoined the land of the living." Introductions were made, and Thomas set about preparing a breakfast of salt pork, biscuits, and strong coffee. Lillian ate slowly but with evident hunger, color continuing to return to her face with each bite. "The storm's cleared," Thomas reported as they ate. "But there's near 3 feet of fresh snow out there." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "Town's unreachable for a few days, I reckon." He glanced at Lillian. "Seems you'll be our guest a while longer, Miss Palmer, if that's acceptable." "I have nowhere else to go," Lillian admitted, her gaze falling to her plate. "The people I was to meet in El Dorado Canyon, they were my last hope." "Family?" Vincent inquired gently. Lillian shook her head. "No, I answered an advertisement, the schoolteacher position." A bitter smile curved her lips. "I suppose they'll think I changed my mind when I don't arrive." "Once the trail's clear, I can take you into town," Vincent offered. "Explain what happened." Gratitude flashed in Lillian's eyes. "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Hawkins." "Vincent," he corrected. "And it's nothing anyone with a conscience wouldn't do." As the day progressed, Lillian's strength gradually returned. By afternoon, she was able to move about the cabin, though Vincent insisted she stay wrapped in blankets near the fire. He provided her with some of his own clothes, oversized but clean and warm as her own were still drying. Thomas left after midday to check on the cattle, leaving Vincent and Lillian alone. An awkward silence settled between them until Lillian finally spoke. "You mentioned you built this place yourself," Vincent nodded, glancing around with quiet pride. "After the war. Came west with not much more than the clothes on my back and a dream of open skies." "The war," Lillian echoed. "You fought for the Union?" "Yes, madam. 6th Ohio Volunteer Infantry." Vincent unconsciously touched a scar that ran along his jaw. "Spent 3 years watching good men die before a rebel bullet found me at Chickamauga. Sent me home to recover, but by then," he shrugged, "didn't feel like home anymore." Lillian studied him with newfound understanding. "So you came west to start fresh." "Something like that," Vincent agreed. "What about you? What brings a lady like yourself out to Wyoming Territory alone?" Lillian's expression clouded. "Necessity, mainly. I was a teacher in Boston until—" She hesitated. "Until circumstances made it impossible to stay." Vincent recognized the carefully constructed barrier in her words. Everyone who came west had something they were running from or running toward. He wouldn't pry. Well, teaching positions are scarce out here. El Dorado Canyon's been trying to establish a proper school for near 2 years now. The children are learning their letters from the preacher's wife at present. Then perhaps I haven't missed my opportunity, Lillian said, hope flickering in her voice. The following days settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. With the deep snow preventing travel, Lillian remained at the cabin, gradually regaining her strength. She insisted on helping with household tasks once she was able, proving herself adept at cooking and mending. Vincent found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire, where conversations flowed more freely. Lillian revealed she was 26, had been teaching since she was 18, and possessed a sharp mind that challenged him in ways he hadn't experienced in years. She was careful about her past, however, offering only glimpses of a privileged upbringing and a subsequent fall from grace that had forced her westward. For his part, Vincent shared stories of his 5 years building the ranch, the challenges of cattle raising, and his hopes to expand come spring. He was 31, had never married, and found the solitude of ranch life suited him better than the crowded cities of his youth. On the 4th day, Thomas returned from checking the eastern pasture with news that the main road to town was passable again. Could make it to El Dorado Canyon by nightfall if we left at first light, he reported over dinner. Vincent felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at the thought of Lillian leaving. He glanced at her, trying to gauge her reaction. "That's good news," she said, though her smile seemed forced. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "No imposition," Vincent said quickly, "but I understand you're eager to start your new position." That night, as Lillian prepared for bed in the small room Vincent had given up for her use, he found himself pacing before the fire, unusually restless. The thought of the empty cabin after her departure left him unsettled in a way he hadn't anticipated. A soft noise drew his attention. Lillian stood in the doorway of her room, wrapped in a blanket, her honey-brown hair loose around her shoulders. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said quietly. "For saving my life." Vincent waved away her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Lillian contradicted gently. "Not everyone would have. The world has shown me that quite clearly." There was something in her eyes, a vulnerability mixed with strength that made Vincent want to know every hurt she'd endured, every joy she'd experienced. "Whatever brought you west," he said carefully, "whatever you're running from, it doesn't follow you here." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. If only that were true. The journey to El Dorado Canyon the next morning was made largely in silence. Vincent drove the wagon, with Lillian seated beside him bundled in furs against the cold. Thomas had remained behind to tend the ranch. El Dorado Canyon came into view just past noon, a growing but still modest settlement nestled in a valley protected by towering rock formations. A main street lined with wooden buildings formed the town's backbone, with smaller structures sprawling outward. The newly constructed church steeple and the larger mercantile marked it as a town with ambitions beyond a simple mining camp. "It's larger than I expected," Lillian remarked, her first words in hours. "Growing every month," Vincent agreed. "The silver strike last year brought new folks, and the railroad spur coming through next summer will bring more." He guided the wagon to the Grand Hotel, a somewhat ambitious name for the 2-story wooden structure, but the only proper accommodation in town. Vincent helped Lillian down, painfully aware this might be their parting. "I'll speak to Mayor Richards about your position," he offered. "His office is just down the street." Lillian touched his arm, her gloved fingers light but sending warmth through his coat nonetheless. "Would you mind?" "That is, I'd prefer to accompany you, if it's not too much trouble." Relief flooded through Vincent. "No trouble at all." Mayor Elias Richards was a corpulent man with political aspirations beyond the territorial limits of Wyoming. He received them in his office behind the town hall, his expansive desk covered with papers and mining claims. "Miss Palmer," he exclaimed after introductions were made. "We'd given up hope. The school teacher from Boston, yes, we received your references months ago." "I apologize for the delay," Lillian said formally. Our wagon was attacked on the road. If not for Mr. Hawkins, I fear I wouldn't be here at all." Richard's expression sobered. "Those damned road agents again. Sheriff Morgan needs to earn his keep." He straightened some papers on his desk. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. The town council approved your appointment. The position comes with a small cottage behind the schoolhouse and a monthly stipend of $30. Lillian's relief was palpable. "When might I begin?" "The schoolhouse is ready whenever you are," Richards replied, "though I suggest taking a day or two to settle in first." After finalizing the arrangements and collecting the key to her new home, Vincent escorted Lillian to the small cottage behind the newly constructed schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was modest, just 2 rooms with basic furnishings, but clean and welcoming. "It's perfect," Lillian declared, turning in a small circle to take in her new home. Vincent set down the single carpet bag containing the few possessions she'd salvaged from the wagon attack. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "Well," he finally said, hat in hand. "I should head back to the ranch before dark." Lillian's smile faltered. "Of course, I've taken enough of your time." "Miss Palmer, Lillian," Vincent corrected himself. "If you need anything, my ranch is just—" "I'll be fine," she interrupted softly. "You've done more than enough." Vincent nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Then I wish you well with your teaching." "Thank you, Vincent, for everything." He left with a strange hollowness in his chest, wondering why saving a woman's life should leave him feeling as though he'd lost something irreplaceable. The following weeks brought the full force of winter to Wyoming Territory. Vincent threw himself into ranch work, expanding the shelters for the cattle and reinforcing the corral fencing against predators. He told himself he was too busy to make the trip into town, though Thomas gave him knowing looks whenever El Dorado Canyon was mentioned. January turned to February, and still Vincent found reasons to send Thomas for supplies instead of going himself. He didn't want to examine too closely why the thought of seeing Lillian Palmer again both compelled and terrified him. It was a letter delivered by a passing traveler that finally broke his resolve. Written in a neat, feminine hand, it was brief but stirred something deep within him. "Mr. Hawkins, I hope this finds you well. The school term has begun successfully with 12 eager students. The town has been most welcoming, though I find myself missing our conversations by the fire. I write because the school board is organizing a social gathering on the 14th to celebrate the new schoolhouse. As the woman whose life you saved, I would be honored if you would attend as my guest. Respectfully, Lillian Palmer." Vincent read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it into his shirt pocket. Thomas watched from across the table with poorly concealed interest. "Good news?" he inquired innocently. "Town's having some kind of social," Vincent replied, attempting nonchalance. "For the new schoolhouse." Thomas grinned. "And the pretty schoolteacher is asking you to escort her." Vincent shot him a warning look. "It's not like that." "Sure it ain't," Thomas chuckled. "That's why you've been moping around here like a lovesick calf for weeks." "I have not been," Vincent began indignantly, then stopped himself. "I saved her life, that's all there is to it." "Then you won't mind if I escort her instead," Thomas suggested slyly. "Been thinking of heading into town anyway." The surge of possessiveness that flooded Vincent surprised even himself. "Don't you have fences to mend?" he growled. Thomas's laughter followed him as he stalked out of the cabin. The night of the social, Vincent found himself more nervous than he'd been facing Confederate artillery. He'd bathed thoroughly, trimmed his beard, and donned his one good suit, a well-worn but serviceable dark wool affair he'd purchased in Cheyenne 2 years prior. The schoolhouse was transformed with lanterns and bunting, tables laden with food prepared by the town's women. Children darted between adults while musicians tuned their instruments in one corner. Vincent stood awkwardly at the entrance, hat in hand, scanning the crowd. When he finally spotted her, his breath caught. Lillian wore a simple blue dress that brought out the green of her eyes, her hair arranged in an elegant twist. She was speaking with an older couple, but her gaze continually drifted toward the door. When she saw Vincent, her face lit with genuine pleasure. She excused herself and made her way toward him. You came, she said simply. Your invitation was persuasive, Vincent replied, suddenly aware of how rough he must appear compared to the townsmen in their finer clothes. Lillian's smile deepened. Let me introduce you to everyone. You're something of a local hero, you know, the man who rescued the new schoolteacher from certain death. Throughout the evening, Vincent found himself pulled into conversations with townsfolk eager to meet the rancher who'd saved Miss Palmer. He answered their questions politely, but remained acutely aware of Lillian's presence nearby, her occasional glances in his direction. When the musicians struck up a waltz, the floor cleared for dancing. Vincent had never been much of a dancer, but when Lillian approached with a questioning look, he found himself offering his arm. I should warn you, he murmured as they took position. I haven't done this since before the war. Just follow my lead, she whispered back. I won't tell anyone. As they moved across the floor, Vincent gradually relaxed into the rhythm. Lillian was a natural dancer, making even his rusty steps seem passable. The warmth of her hand in his, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, these things imprinted themselves on his senses. How are you finding teaching here? He asked as they circled the floor. Challenging but rewarding, Lillian replied. The children are eager to learn, though some have never held a book before. And the town, they're treating you well, a shadow crossed Lillian's face. Mostly, there are always those who view newcomers with suspicion, especially women on their own. Vincent frowned. Has someone been unkind? Nothing I can't handle, Lillian assured him. I've faced worse. The music ended and Vincent reluctantly released her. They moved to the refreshment table where Lillian poured them both cups of punch. I've missed our conversations, she admitted, her voice low. The cottage is comfortable, but sometimes the silence is overwhelming. Vincent understood completely. The cabin feels emptier than before, he confessed. Thomas says I've been poor company lately. Their eyes met, a current of understanding passing between them. Before either could speak further, Mayor Richards approached with a middle-aged man Vincent didn't recognize. Miss Palmer, just the lady we were seeking, Richards boomed. Allow me to introduce Mr. Howard Sullivan, recently arrived from Denver. He's considering substantial investments in our little community. Sullivan was expensively dressed, with a gold watch chain prominently displayed across his waistcoat. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he took Lillian's hand, holding it longer than necessary. Miss Palmer, he said smoothly. I've heard much about the beautiful new schoolteacher. The descriptions hardly do you justice. Vincent noticed how Lillian stiffened, though her social smile remained fixed. Mr. Sullivan, she acknowledged coolly, withdrawing her hand. Welcome to El Dorado Canyon. Mr. Sullivan is particularly interested in educational advancement, Richards continued, oblivious to the tension. Perhaps you might show him the schoolhouse? I'm afraid the schoolhouse is locked for the evening, Lillian replied quickly. But I'd be happy to arrange a tour during school hours next week. Sullivan's smile tightened. I was hoping for a more private discussion of your teaching methods, Miss Palmer. Vincent stepped forward slightly. Miss Palmer was just promising me the next dance, he interjected, offering his arm to Lillian. If you'll excuse us, gentlemen. As he led her back to the dance floor, Vincent felt Lillian's hand trembling slightly on his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Man seems overly familiar for a new acquaintance, Vincent observed, carefully positioning them away from Sullivan's view. Some men believe their money entitles them to familiarity, Lillian replied bitterly. They danced in silence for several moments before Vincent spoke again. Will you be all right after I return to the ranch? Lillian met his gaze steadily. I've survived on my own this long. That's not what I asked. The music ended before she could answer. As the evening wound down, Vincent found himself reluctant to leave. When most guests had departed, he offered to walk Lillian to her cottage. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the velvet sky. Their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air as they walked the short distance to Lillian's home. At her door, Lillian turned to face him. Would you like to come in? For coffee, I mean, she added quickly. Vincent hesitated. The proper thing would be to decline, but the thought of returning to his empty cabin held no appeal. Coffee would be welcome, he said. The cottage was small but neat, with personal touches already evident: a crocheted throw across the chair, a small shelf of books, wildflowers pressed between glass frames on the wall. Lillian busied herself with the coffee pot while Vincent stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "Please sit," she invited, gesturing to the small table by the window. Vincent removed his coat and took a seat, watching as she moved efficiently around the tiny kitchen. There was an ease to her movements here that spoke of growing comfort with her surroundings. "You've made this place your own," he observed. Lillian smiled as she brought the coffee pot to the table. "It's beginning to feel like home." As she poured the steaming liquid into cups, Vincent noticed a faint bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. Without thinking, he reached out, gently touching her arm. "What happened?" Lillian withdrew her hand quickly. "It's nothing. I caught it in a desk drawer." Vincent didn't believe her for a moment, but he didn't press. Instead, he sipped his coffee, allowing the comfortable silence to stretch between them. "Vincent," Lillian finally said, "may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, curious. "Why did you really come tonight? Was it merely courtesy because of my letter?" The question caught him off guard. Vincent stared into his coffee cup, formulating his response carefully. "I came because the thought of not seeing you again was troubling." Lillian's breath caught audibly. "Oh, I'm not a man of fancy words, Lillian," Vincent continued, meeting her gaze directly. "But these past weeks, I've found myself thinking of you more than is probably proper." A blush crept up Lillian's cheeks. "I've thought of you as well," she admitted softly. Vincent reached across the table, his larger hand covering hers. "Then perhaps I might call on you properly. When I come to town for supplies next week." Lillian turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. "I would like that very much." The winter months passed with Vincent making increasingly frequent trips to El Dorado Canyon. Each visit included time spent with Lillian, walks through town, Sunday services together, quiet dinners in her cottage. They spoke of books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams for the future. Slowly, the barriers between them lowered. It was during an unseasonably warm March afternoon, as they walked along the creek behind the schoolhouse, that Lillian finally shared her past. "I was engaged once," she began hesitantly, "in Boston, to the son of my father's business partner." Vincent remained silent, sensing her need to continue without interruption. Edward seemed everything a young woman could want: handsome, educated, from a good family, but there was another side to him, a darkness that only emerged in private. Lillian's voice grew distant. "The first time he struck me, I told myself it was an isolated incident. By the third time, I knew better." Vincent's hands clenched involuntarily. "When I broke the engagement, his fury was substantial. He threatened to ruin me to ensure no school would hire me. And in Boston, his family had the influence to do it." Lillian's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "So I ran, changed my name slightly. I was Lillian Parker before, and applied for teaching positions as far west as I could manage." "Is that why you tensed when Sullivan approached you at the social?" Vincent asked quietly. Lillian nodded. "Men like that, they recognize vulnerability, prey on it." Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Lillian Palmer. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her smile was tremulous but genuine. "Coming west was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, until I nearly froze to death, that is." Vincent reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And yet here you are, teaching children, building a new life." "Here I am," she echoed softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Vincent leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When their lips met, it was soft and questioning at first, then deepening with shared longing. When they finally pulled apart, Lillian's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. "I never thought I'd trust a man again," she whispered. Vincent cradled her face gently in his calloused hands. "I will never give you reason to regret that trust," he promised. Their courtship progressed steadily through spring. Vincent expanded his trips to town to twice weekly, often bringing small gifts: wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Cheyenne, fresh honey from the hives he kept on the north pasture. Lillian blossomed under his attention, her natural reserve giving way to a quiet confidence that made her even more beautiful in his eyes. The town noticed, of course. El Dorado Canyon was too small for romance to go unremarked, especially when it involved the schoolteacher and the rancher who'd saved her life. Most viewed their courtship with approval. Even a touch of romanticism it was, after all, the stuff of dime novels. A woman rescued from certain death finding love with her savior. Not everyone was supportive, however. Howard Sullivan had established himself in town, purchasing the Grand Hotel and several mining claims. He made no secret of his interest in Lillian, sending expensive gifts to her cottage, which she promptly returned. His persistence bordered on harassment, though he was careful to maintain a veneer of gentlemanly behavior in public. One evening in late April, Vincent arrived at Lillian's cottage to find her visibly shaken. She'd just returned from the schoolhouse where she'd been preparing lessons for the following day. "What happened?" Vincent demanded, noting her pallor. "Mr. Sullivan was waiting in the schoolhouse," Lillian explained, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "He made it clear that his interest in me wasn't going to be discouraged by my relationship with you." Vincent's expression darkened. "Did he threaten you?" "Not explicitly. He merely suggested that, as the newest investor in the town, he had considerable influence over my continued employment." Lillian's hands twisted in her lap. "When I told him I had no interest in his advances, he became insistent." "Did he touch you?" The question came out harsher than Vincent intended. Lillian hesitated. "He grabbed my arm when I tried to leave. I managed to pull away." Vincent stood abruptly, reaching for his hat. "I'll have a word with him." "No," Lillian caught his arm. "Please, Vincent, that would only make things worse. The school board meeting is tomorrow night. I intend to lodge a formal complaint then." With visible effort, Vincent reined in his anger. "I won't let him intimidate you." "I know." Lillian's expression softened. "That's one of the reasons I love you." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either had spoken of love directly, though their actions had conveyed the sentiment for weeks. Vincent pulled her gently into his arms. "Say that again," he murmured against her hair. "I love you, Vincent Hawkins," Lillian repeated, her voice stronger, "and I love you, Lillian Palmer." Vincent tilted her chin up, his kiss conveying all the emotions words couldn't express. "Which is why I want you to marry me." Lillian's eyes widened. "Vincent, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly, "and my ranch isn't much compared to what you might have had in Boston, but I promise you a life of respect and caring, and I swear I'll work every day to deserve your love." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The school board meeting the following evening was held in the town hall. Vincent insisted on accompanying Lillian, a silent but resolute presence at her side. The 5 board members, including Mayor Richards and the town's preacher, listened gravely as Lillian detailed Sullivan's inappropriate behavior. "These are serious allegations, Miss Palmer," Richards said when she'd finished. "Mr. Sullivan is an important investor in our community." "Which doesn't entitle him to harass the schoolteacher," Vincent interjected firmly. Richards shifted uncomfortably. "Of course not. But we must consider." The door opened, and Sullivan himself entered, immaculately dressed as always. "Forgive my lateness," he said smoothly. "I was informed the meeting had been postponed." Vincent felt Lillian tense beside him. "We were just discussing some concerns raised by Miss Palmer," Richards explained, his tone conciliatory, Sullivan's gaze fixed on Lillian, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Concerns? I can't imagine what concerns our lovely schoolteacher might have with me." "You know exactly what concerns," Lillian replied steadily. "Your unwanted advances and implied threats regarding my position." Sullivan laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "My dear Miss Palmer, I think you've misinterpreted my friendly interest. Perhaps your time in the wilderness with Mr. Hawkins has compromised your judgment of proper behavior." Vincent took a step forward, but Lillian's hand on his arm stopped him. "My judgment is perfectly intact," she said clearly, "and I won't be intimidated into silence." The preacher, Reverend Wallace, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sullivan, these allegations are quite specific. Miss Palmer claims you accosted her in the schoolhouse yesterday evening. A complete fabrication, Sullivan dismissed. I merely expressed concern about her teaching methods, which some parents have found questionable. What parents? Vincent demanded. Name them. Sullivan smiled thinly. I'm protecting their privacy, of course. But as the primary donor for the school's expansion, I believe I have some right to oversight. The meeting deteriorated from there, with Richards clearly reluctant to challenge Sullivan's version of events. By the end, no resolution had been reached, though Reverend Wallace promised to investigate further. As they left the town hall, Vincent's anger was palpable. This isn't over, he muttered. That man is dangerous. Lillian squeezed his hand. I know, but I won't let him drive me away. This is my home now. The weeks that followed were tense. Lillian continued teaching, but Vincent insisted on escorting her to and from the schoolhouse whenever he was in town. When ranch work kept him away, Thomas took his place, sleeping on Lillian's sofa to ensure her safety. Sullivan maintained his public persona of respectability while subtly undermining Lillian's position. Rumors began circulating about her questionable past and improper relationship with Vincent. Some parents withdrew their children from the school, though most stood firmly by the teacher who had transformed their children's education. Through it all, Vincent and Lillian's relationship deepened. They planned a June wedding, a simple ceremony at the church followed by a celebration at the ranch. Lillian would complete the school term, then move permanently to Vincent's home, where they would build a life together. It was early May when disaster struck. Vincent had been away for 3 days, driving cattle to the northern pastures. When he returned to the ranch, he found Thomas waiting with grim news. Miss Palmer's been arrested, he said without preamble. Vincent's blood ran cold. What? On what charges? Theft, Thomas replied. Sullivan claims she stole a valuable watch from his hotel suite during a school board meeting there last week. That's absurd, Vincent growled, already turning toward the stable. Lillian wouldn't, I know that, Thomas interrupted. But they found the watch in her cottage during a search this morning. Sheriff Morgan took her to the jail about 2 hours ago. Vincent had never ridden to town faster. The sun was setting by the time he thundered into El Dorado Canyon, heading straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Morgan was a reasonable man who had always maintained a cordial relationship with Vincent. He looked uncomfortable as Vincent burst through the door. Where is she? Vincent demanded. Now, Hawkins, calm yourself, Morgan cautioned, rising from his desk. Miss Palmer is being held pending her hearing tomorrow. The evidence was planted and you know it, Vincent cut him off. Sullivan is framing her because she rejected him. Morgan sighed heavily. I don't disagree with you. But the watch was found in her possession and Sullivan is pressing charges. My hands are tied until the hearing. I want to see her, Vincent insisted. Morgan hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, and keep your voice down. Sullivan's got friends watching. The cell was small but clean, with a narrow cot and single barred window. Lillian sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, the picture of dignity despite her circumstances. When she saw Vincent, her composure cracked slightly. I didn't take it, she said immediately. I know, Vincent replied, reaching through the bars to take her hands. This ends tomorrow. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. He came to the cottage after school, said if I agreed to his proposition, the watch would never have been stolen at all. Vincent's jaw clenched. I'll kill him. No, Lillian squeezed his hands urgently. That's exactly what he wants, to provoke you into something rash. The hearing is tomorrow. We need evidence, not violence. Vincent took a deep breath, forcing his rage down. You're right, and I think I know where to start looking. That night, Vincent and Thomas devised a plan. While Vincent maintained a visible presence at the saloon, establishing an alibi, Thomas slipped into the Grand Hotel through the service entrance. As Sullivan's valet, a man named Peters, had a weakness for gambling and was deeply in debt to the saloon owner, it took minimal persuasion and a substantial bribe to gain his cooperation. By morning, Vincent had what he needed. As the hearing convened in the town hall, with Mayor Richards presiding as Justice of the Peace, the room was packed with townspeople. Opinions seemed divided, with many supporting Lillian but others swayed by Sullivan's wealth and influence. Sullivan presented his case first, his manner regretful but firm as he described discovering his grandfather's gold watch missing after a school board meeting held in his hotel suite. The search of Lillian's cottage, authorized by Sheriff Morgan based on an anonymous tip, had recovered the watch from beneath her mattress. When it was Lillian's turn to speak, she maintained her innocence with quiet dignity. "I have never taken anything that didn't belong to me," she stated clearly. "I believe Mr. Sullivan planted that watch himself, or had it planted, as revenge for my rejection of his advances." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sullivan scoffed audibly. "That's a serious counter-accusation, Miss Palmer," Richards said gravely. "Do you have any evidence to support it?" "I do," Vincent spoke up, rising from his seat. "With your permission, I'd like to call a witness." Richards looked startled but nodded. "Proceed." Vincent beckoned to Thomas, who escorted Peters, Sullivan's valet, into the room. The man looked nervous but determined. "State your name for the record," Richards instructed. "James Peters, sir. I serve as Mr. Sullivan's personal valet at the Grand Hotel." Vincent stepped forward. "Mr. Peters, can you tell us if Mr. Sullivan asked you to do anything unusual regarding Miss Palmer's cottage?" Peters swallowed hard, avoiding Sullivan's furious glare. "Yes, sir. 2 days ago, Mr. Sullivan gave me a gold watch and instructed me to place it in Miss Palmer's home while she was teaching. He provided me with a key." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Richards banged his gavel for order. "That's preposterous," Sullivan shouted. "The man is clearly lying, probably bribed by Hawkins." "I also have this," Vincent continued calmly, producing a folded paper from his pocket. "A signed affidavit from the locksmith who made a copy of Miss Palmer's key last week, at Mr. Sullivan's request. He was told it was for maintenance purposes at the school board's direction." Richards accepted the document, reading it with growing concern. "Mr. Sullivan, these allegations are extremely serious." Sullivan's composure cracked. "This is absurd. You can't possibly believe a ranch hand and a drunken locksmith over me. I've invested thousands in this town." "And you thought that entitled you to whatever or whomever you wanted," Lillian said quietly. The hearing concluded with Richards dismissing all charges against Lillian and ordering Sullivan to appear before the territorial court on charges of false accusation and breaking and entering. Sullivan stormed out, vowing revenge. As the town hall emptied, Vincent took Lillian in his arms, heedless of the public display. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "Not quite," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite her ordeal. "The school board still needs to formally reinstate me." "They will," Vincent assured her. "And if they don't, we'll build our own school at the ranch." Lillian smiled at that, the first genuine smile he'd seen since her arrest. "I love you, Vincent Hawkins, enough to marry me this weekend instead of waiting until June?" he asked impulsively. Lillian's eyes widened. "This weekend." "I nearly lost you," Vincent said simply. "I don't want to wait any longer to make you my wife." Her answer was a kiss that drew cheers from the remaining townspeople. The wedding took place that Saturday at the small church, with Reverend Wallace officiating. The school board had indeed reinstated Lillian, with formal apologies, and most of the town turned out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the rancher who'd saved her life. Lillian wore a simple white dress ordered from Cheyenne, with wildflowers in her hair. Vincent had never seen anything more beautiful than her face as she walked down the aisle toward him, her eyes shining with love and promise. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt. Vincent pledged his protection, his fidelity, and his enduring love. Lillian promised her trust, her support, and her heart for all their days. When Reverend Wallace pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers nearly raised the church's roof. The celebration afterward at Vincent's ranch, their ranch now, lasted well into the evening. Townsfolk and neighboring ranchers alike joined in the festivities, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. As dusk fell, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone at last. They stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the road toward town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hawkins," Vincent said softly, his arm around her waist. Lillian leaned into his embrace. "It feels right being here, like I've finally found where I belong." Vincent led her inside to the cabin that no longer felt empty. He'd expanded it in preparation for their marriage, adding a larger bedroom and improving the kitchen. A bookshelf now stood against one wall, ready for Lillian's collection, and fresh curtains brightened the windows. "It's not what you were accustomed to in Boston," Vincent said, suddenly self-conscious about the modest accommodations. Lillian turned to face him, her expression serious. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having again, a home, safety." She touched his face gently. "Love." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a culmination of the feelings that had grown between them since that snowy December day. Vincent was gentle, mindful of Lillian's past experiences, but she met him with unexpected ardor, her trust in him evident in every touch, every whispered endearment. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the quilts, Lillian's head resting on his chest, Vincent felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible. "I love you, Lillian Hawkins," he murmured into her hair. She smiled against his skin. "I'm going to enjoy hearing that for the rest of our lives." The days that followed settled into a rhythm of shared work and deepening connection. Lillian completed the school term, riding to town each morning and returning in the afternoon. Vincent expanded his cattle operation, more motivated than ever to build something substantial for their future. They faced challenges, of course. Sullivan left town shortly after the wedding, but not before selling his interests to investors who weren't always sympathetic to the smaller ranchers. Drought threatened the summer grazing, and cattle prices fluctuated unpredictably. Through it all, their partnership only strengthened. Lillian proved herself as adept at ranch bookkeeping as she was at teaching, while Vincent supported her continued role as El Dorado Canyon's educator. They complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated, filling gaps in the other's experience and temperament. By autumn, they had more cause for celebration. Lillian confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks: they would welcome their first child in the spring. Vincent's reaction stunned silence, followed by a whoop of joy that sent the chickens scattering, became one of her favorite stories to recount in years to come. The winter of 1877 proved milder than the previous year, for which they were both grateful. As Lillian's condition advanced, Vincent became increasingly protective, insisting she reduce her teaching schedule and eventually hiring a young woman from town to take over her classes temporarily. Lillian bore his fussing with good humor, though she drew the line at complete confinement. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him repeatedly. On a bright April morning in 1878, after 18 hours of labor that left Vincent pacing the porch while the midwife and Thomas's wife attended Lillian, their son was born. They named him Matthew James Hawkins, after Vincent's father and Lillian's grandfather. As Vincent held his son for the first time, the tiny face peering up at him from within the blankets, he was overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Pride, certainly. Joy beyond measure. But also a fierce protectiveness that surpassed anything he'd felt before. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the baby to Lillian's arms. She smiled tiredly, her face glowing despite her exhaustion. "He looks like you?" "Poor child," Vincent joked, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope he has your brains and my good fortune in finding someone to love." Matthew thrived in the ranch environment, growing into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed Vincent everywhere and adored his mother's stories. Lillian returned to teaching part-time when he was 6 months old, often bringing him along to the schoolhouse, where the older children doted on their baby. The ranch prospered as well. Vincent's careful management and Lillian's strategic investments, guided by her father's business lessons, allowed them to expand their holdings and improve their home. By the time Matthew was 3, they had rebuilt the cabin into a proper ranch house, with multiple bedrooms, a study for Lillian's books, and a wide veranda where they could watch the sunset over their land. In the spring of 1882, they welcomed twin daughters, Emily Rose and Clara Elizabeth. Vincent fainted clean away when the midwife announced the second baby was coming, providing the town with an anecdote they would tease him about for years to come. 3 children, Lillian marveled one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching Matthew teach his younger sisters to roll a hoop across the yard. If anyone had told me that snowy day what lay ahead. Vincent took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Do you ever regret it? Staying in Wyoming instead of continuing east, Lillian considered the question seriously. I came west seeking safety and a new beginning. I found a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought possible. She smiled at him, the same smile that still quickened his heart after 6 years of marriage. How could I regret that? The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. Thomas, now their ranch foreman, rode into the yard with a letter in hand. Express rider just delivered this from Cheyenne, he called, dismounting. Marked urgent, Vincent accepted the envelope with a frown. Mail, especially urgent mail, was uncommon at the ranch. He broke the seal, scanning the contents quickly before his expression darkened. What is it? Lillian asked, concern evident in her voice. Vincent handed her the letter. It's from a lawyer in Boston. Your father has died. Lillian stared at the paper, her face unreadable. She hadn't spoken to her parents since leaving Boston 6 years earlier. Their disapproval of her broken engagement and fear of Edward's family's influence had created a rift that seemed unbridgeable. There's more, Vincent said gently. He left you his entire estate. The lawyer requests you come to Boston to settle the affairs. That night, after the children were asleep, they discussed the unexpected news. Lillian's emotions were complex: grief for the father she'd loved despite their estrangement, regret for the years of silence, and trepidation about returning to the city where her nightmares had begun. I don't have to go, she said finally. We could handle it through correspondence. Vincent studied her face in the lamplight. Is that what you want? Lillian hesitated. No, she admitted. I want closure, and I want our children to know something of their heritage even if we never return after this visit. Then we'll go together, Vincent decided, the whole family. The journey to Boston in the summer of 1882 was Lillian's first return east since her desperate flight years before. The city had changed, yet remained familiar in ways that stirred both pleasant memories and painful ones. The Palmer estate in Beacon Hill stood much as Lillian remembered an elegant townhouse that now seemed excessive after years of ranch living. Her mother, Elizabeth Palmer, greeted them with stiff formality that gradually thawed in the presence of her grandchildren. You look well, Lillian, she observed on their second evening after the children had been put to bed. Country living appears to agree with you. I am well, Mother, Lillian confirmed, happier than I ever imagined possible. Elizabeth glanced at Vincent, who was examining her late husband's library with interest. Your husband is not what I expected, Lillian smiled. No, I imagine not. He's better than anything you could have arranged. The settlement of Charles Palmer's estate was straightforward but substantial. He had prospered in Lillian's absence, and the inheritance was considerable enough to secure their children's education and the ranch's future for generations. More surprising was the collection of letters they discovered among Charles's papers, unsent correspondence to Lillian, dating from her departure through his final illness. In them, her father expressed regret for not supporting her against Edward, pride in her courage to forge her own path, and eventually joy at news of her marriage and children, gleaned from private investigators he'd hired to ensure her well-being. He never stopped loving you, Elizabeth explained tearfully when Lillian showed her the letters. His pride prevented him from reaching out directly, but he followed your life from afar. Their planned 2-week stay extended to a month as Lillian reconnected with her mother and introduced her family to the city of her birth. Vincent, initially uncomfortable amid the wealth and formality of Boston society, found unexpected common ground with Elizabeth Palmer over their shared love for Lillian and the children. It was during their final week in Boston that the past resurfaced in unwelcome form. Edward Blackwell, Lillian's former fiancé, appeared unannounced at the Palmer home while Vincent was out with the children. The years had not been kind to him. Though still handsome in a conventional way, dissipation had thickened his features and soured his once charming smile. "Lillian," he greeted her, uninvited in the parlor. "You look rustic." Lillian stood her ground, surprised to find no fear in his presence, only pity and a distant distaste. "What do you want, Edward? I heard you'd returned." He moved closer, his gaze calculating. "With your father gone and your unusual situation, I thought perhaps you might reconsider our arrangement. My offer of marriage still stands." Lillian laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "You can't be serious." Edward's expression hardened. "Your frontier fantasy won't last, Lillian. When you tire of playing pioneer, my family's position can restore yours in society." "My position is exactly where I wish it to be," Lillian replied firmly. "As Mrs. Hawkins, mother of 3, teacher and ranch wife, I wouldn't trade it for all the society connections in Boston." Edward's face flushed with anger. "That cowboy can't give you what I can." "You're right," Lillian agreed calmly. "He gives me far more respect, partnership, and love without conditions. Now please leave before my husband returns with our children. I wouldn't want them to witness your removal." For a moment, Edward's expression suggested violence, but the sound of the front door opening broke the tension. He departed without another word, passing Vincent and the children in the hallway with barely a nod. "Who was that?" Vincent asked later, his tone carefully neutral. Lillian told him truthfully, watching his expression darken. "He poses no threat to me anymore," she assured him. "I realized today that he never did. The power I thought he held was mostly in my own fear." Vincent drew her into his arms. "Ready to go home?" Lillian smiled against his chest. "More than ready." They left Boston a week later, Elizabeth Palmer accompanying them as far as Cheyenne, where she promised to visit again the following summer. The journey west felt like a homecoming in ways Lillian hadn't anticipated. The moment the mountains appeared on the horizon, she felt her spirit lighten. El Dorado Canyon had grown in their absence. The railroad spur, completed the previous year, had brought new businesses and settlers. The school now boasted 2 full-time teachers besides Lillian, who had taken on the role of headmistress while maintaining a reduced teaching schedule that accommodated her family responsibilities. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms, enriched by their experiences and the security Lillian's inheritance provided. They established a scholarship fund for promising students and expanded the ranch's operations to include breeding horses, a venture that proved even more successful than the cattle. The years flowed past, marked by the seasons and their children's growth. Matthew followed in Vincent's footsteps, showing a natural affinity for ranch work and a head for business that combined the best of both his parents. Emily developed Lillian's love for teaching, while Clara revealed an unexpected talent for medicine, eventually traveling east to attend one of the new medical colleges accepting women. Through it all, Vincent and Lillian's partnership deepened. The passionate love of their early years matured into something equally intense, but more comfortable, a bone-deep certainty in each other that withstood hardship, celebrated joy, and found beauty in the ordinary moments of their shared life. On a December evening in 1896, 20 years to the day since Vincent found Lillian shivering in the snow, they stood together on the veranda of their home. The ranch spread before them, lights glowing in the bunkhouse where their hands were celebrating the holiday season. Their eldest grandchild, Matthew's 4-year-old son, slept inside, exhausted from the day's festivities. Vincent wrapped his arm around Lillian's waist, still slender despite the years and children. "Any regrets, Mrs. Hawkins?" he asked, a question that had become something of a tradition between them. Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, her once honey-brown hair now streaked with silver. "Only that we can't live it all again," Vincent chuckled, the sound still as warm as the day she'd first heard it. "If we could, would you change anything?" Lillian considered the question seriously, as she always did. Their life hadn't been without hardship: drought years that threatened the ranch, the influenza that nearly took Emily, the constant challenges of building something lasting in a sometimes harsh land. "Not a single moment," she answered truthfully. "Every step led us here." Vincent kissed her temple, his love as evident in the gesture as it had been on their wedding day. "Remember what I said when I found you in that snowdrift?" Lillian smiled, the memory still vivid despite the passing years. "My home has room for your healing." "Best thing I ever said," Vincent reflected, "though I had no idea then that you'd heal me just as much." As they stood together watching the snow begin to fall softly over their land, Lillian thought of the frightened young woman she'd been, and the fulfilling life she'd found in the most unexpected place. The journey from that snowdrift to this moment hadn't always been easy, but it had been rich beyond measure. "I love you, Vincent Hawkins," she said simply, words that had never lost their power over 2 decades. "And I love you," he replied, turning her gently to face him. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." In the quiet Wyoming night, with the ranch peaceful around them and their family safe within, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that the cowboy who had found her shivering in the snow had given her not just a home for healing, but a lifetime of love, purpose, and belonging, the greatest gift anyone could receive.